think can I tell you the best thing the Republicans have going for them? That would be the Democrats. I mean, there's no way you could pick a leader in that campaign. You know, if you go back to the 1994 election, Newt Gingrich galvanized the opposition against Bill Clinton, and he picked up a contract for America, and he had everybody sign that, and they moved in a voting bloc with real force. The Democrats are not doing that. But they may win anyway, but they're not doing that.
But the president can't design what he's doing. I mean, he doesn't say, I ought to be here today, in West Virginia tomorrow, etc. I mean, somebody's thinking this out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a combination of some of the political consultants, people like Brad Pascal, that happen to be the Trump 2020 campaign manager. Kellyanne Conway has great pollster experience. I'm sure she's looking at polling data and making recommendations on the president's schedule like she did in the 2016 campaign. But don't underestimate his instincts, and don't underestimate the force of his personality in terms of where he wants to go and what he wants to say when he gets there.
Well, he's certainly flaunting the strength of his personality, but surely this is possibly one of the most beneficial moments anybody could run for an election, and that's full employment and a booming economy. Doesn't seem to talk about that at all. He wants to talk about immigration.
Well, I think one of the things the president's trying to do is he's figured out that voter participation needs to be way higher from his base if he wants to keep the House. And so he's picking the hot buttons, and he's pressing down very hard on those hot buttons. So the economy is one of those feel-good things. Unfortunately, people vote on fear. And so one of the reasons why you get this massive turnout for the opposition on these midterms is that they're unhappy. And so unhappy voters have a tendency to vote, and complacent voters have a tendency not to vote. So if you're out there in those arenas talking about the growth and the success of the economy, it's not pressing down on the pain centers that you may feel. And immigration is certainly one of those pain centers for that base of people.
But some of his language has been pretty extreme, isn't it, on immigration?
For a president, it's been pretty extreme, but for Mr. Trump and President Trump, it's probably inside the bell curve of what he's been saying over the last 30 months. It's not really outside of that. I think what people have to recognize is the American people, a good 62.8 million of them, don't like the system. They don't like the establishment. They want a disruptive challenge to the establishment. And so the bellicosity of his rhetoric is a representation of that. It's almost like a metaphorical wrecking ball. So it's not really different from the campaign, frankly.
But if you think that he's been pretty extreme on immigration, and that was your word, is he demeaning the office of president?
Well, when I say that he's being extreme, is that he's putting that front and center. I don't think the policies.
Some of the language is pretty extreme.
I think the language is rough. There's no question about that. Listen. Probably one of the reasons why I didn't last is that my recommendation would be to have less rough language. I think the personality of the president and the fact that he was a television star prior to arriving in the presidency, the track record, the success he's had in these different categories, I think they speak well of him, and he could style himself differently. And I think he's got a 5 to 7 point headwind as a result of some of that negativity. So that's me. But you're asking me to explain it, or you're asking me to give you my opinion or my advice?
No, you've answered it well.
Yeah.
I mean, you've told me. But the thing that strikes me is that not so long ago, he was a Democrat, and he was funding Hillary Clinton.
Schumer.
The journey that he's made to this really quite, well, you used the word extreme usage of language, is extraordinary.
It is in some ways, and in other ways it's an evolution of what's going on in the country. And so, I mean, if you look at I write about it in my book, he thought about running for president in '88, held fire, thought about it again in '93, held fire because he was going through a business difficulty. In 2000, he was ready to take the Reform Party nomination, but he recognized that he couldn't win the presidency from a third party. So,
but in that period, he gave money to Hillary Clinton.
Everybody gave money to everybody. He did what New Yorkers do. I'm a New Yorker. I've given money to Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Chuck Schumer. If you're trying to make a point that there's an elasticity to the president's ideology, point well taken, and the proof is in the pudding.
Well, actually, what I was going to
suggest, check writing.
What I was going to suggest was that he might understand Democrats, having been one himself, and he might know better how to reach out to them.
Yeah, I think that the problem, though, is the extremists in the system. I think that maybe 6-7 months ago, sitting in the Roosevelt room with cameras like this on, he told people he was ready to make a deal. Those people that were in the room weren't ready to make that deal, and so they came out of that with that whole expletive that he said about the countries in an effort to try to demonize him and try to characterize him as a racist, which I think is very unfair. But I think the president, and I write about this in the book, there's less ideological aspects of his personality. He is a deal cutter. You know, I predict he'll get a deal done with the Chinese, if not by the end of the year, before the end of the first month of 2019. And so he got the deal done with Canada and Mexico. He'll get a deal done with China. And he's a deal cutter. And so he has less ideological fragments in his personality, but I think he does believe very strongly that we need to have legalized immigration and we need to have some protection at our border. And I think most countries, frankly, John, have protection at their border. And so if you have 8 to 12 million people that have entered the country illegally outside of our system, it's had a big impact on lower and middle class wages. And so remember this, cutting the slack at the border took the slack out of the labor market, and that's the reason why the African American and Hispanic American unemployment numbers are at historic lows. You could attribute that to the president's immigration policy.
Do you think he's right to have made himself such an issue in what is really, in the end, an election not for him, but for the House and for the Senate?
If he wants to win, he's right. Yeah, absolutely.
You think there are enough people who love Donald Trump to overwhelm any interest in party?
We'll have to see about that. I don't know the answer to that. If you interview me,
you don't sound very confident.
Because historically he's betting. The bet is against history. The headwind is against him. Angry voters are people that are not in power, and they turn up in much higher volume than complacent
voters. But the economic
voters.
wind is with him. I mean,
yeah,
there he is presiding over.
That creates.
He didn't bring it about, but he is presiding over a very strong economy.
Well, he did bring it about. I take a little bit of
he
issue
inherited
with that.
a pretty good hand from Obama.
He delayered the regulatory process, and he reformed the taxes, and he changed the dynamic at the bully pulpit in terms of the restoration of business confidence. You know, the reason why there was a ceiling on the growth in the economy was that the Obama administration, whether they were pro-business or not, we can debate that, but they were perceived by business leaders, large and small, as being anti-business. And so taking that regulator out of the equation, he definitely helped the economic growth. I mean, he popped the growth. You don't want to give him credit for that, that's okay. I'm a trained economist, I give him credit for that. I look at it for the objective way that I can look at it. But you're asking a number of different questions, so let me characterize them and answer them, okay, sequentially. Number one, if he wins the House, he will have cheated history. Obama, using his own words, President Obama's own words, was shellacked in 2010, lost 63 House seats. So if he wins, making it about himself was a good strategy because he's very well liked in those communities. He's pulling 10,000 people at a rally and 5,000 people in the overflow room. So if he wins, that was a good strategy.
And if he loses?
If he loses, I would say he's probably going to lose less than he would have had he not deployed that strategy. So I'll still stick with that was a good strategy. On the economy, not arguing the economy is because complacency and happiness doesn't turn out the vote. What turns out the vote is people are angry about something or they feel that something is unjust, and they'll show up at the polls and vote that.
Is he a logical descendant of Lincoln, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Obama?
Oh, you don't think he's a very stable genius, like a kind of very stable genius?
You're the man who would know.
No, listen, is he the logical descendant? I think that there was a corruptive force in the system over the last 35 years that led the system to Donald Trump. The same way your system in Great Britain led to a Brexit. I think there's a large group of people through the forces of globalization and through the forces of economic disruption that are very dissatisfied with their public officials. They feel that their public officials, there's been a vacuum of advocacy for these people, and I think he filled that void pretty well. Does he speak like Abraham Lincoln? No, I mean, he definitely doesn't speak like Abraham Lincoln, but let me tell you something, he's a popular guy, and he's way more popular than the left side of the media would like him to be. And look, I go out there and campaign for him, and you can see that popularity. And there's a lot of whisper popularity, where I'm not going to tell you in front of a camera that I like the guy, but I actually like the guy. I can't tell you the number of people I run into all over the country that say, hey, I can't really say in my social group I like him, but I do like him.
Anthony Scaramucci, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.